Welcome back aboard the Zephyrus. I am Captain Victor T. Mayfair, and this is the Mythos Anthology. Retrofuturism. That period of American mythology where we look back at the 1950s and 60s and think Tomorrowland was going to happen. That we'd all be doing our Flash Gordon, flying around by 2020 with our individual jetpacks, wearing silver suits and bubbles on our head, flying up to our cities in the sky. Well, clearly that didn't happen, but the mythology did. It grew an entire life unto itself, and I wanted to explore that a little deeper, so I went to our resident expert again, the Scientarch of Mars, a person with a very unique view on our planet, and asked him for his thoughts on the subject. Sir, thank you for taking the time to sit with us again. I know your research on, well, us keeps you busy, but in our last conversation was so insightful. I hope that you would continue with me on a parallel path. I'd like to explore the atomic age and the moment that we now refer to as retrofuturism or atomic punk. But for those who have not listened to our first interview with you, would you start with a history of who you are and how you became such an expert on us?
Captain Mayfair, it is both a pleasure and an honor to engage in conversation once more. The study of your species is an inexhaustible pursuit, rich with nuance, contradictions, and revelations that continue to captivate my Martian intellect. If humanity is an enigma, then storytelling is the cipher through which I attempt to decode it. As for my history, you are correct to assume that there may be listeners unacquainted with our prior discussion. Therefore, I shall recount the essentials. I am the Scientarch of Mars, once a chief overseer of scientific progress and cultural assessment for my people. In 1938, my kind launched an ill-fated incursion upon Earth, a campaign that, while doomed by factors both microbial and strategic, provided me with an unparalleled opportunity for study. My role in the invasion was not one of conquest, but of evaluation. I was tasked with determining the viability of humanity as a potential subject within the Martian dominion. However, as history and Orson Welles' remarkable broadcast has recorded, your species proved resistant, not merely in military or microbial terms, but in sheer indomitable spirit. That fateful evening of radio drama, in which human imagination turned fiction into tangible hysteria, revealed to me a truth far more profound than anything we could have gleaned through force. Your people do not simply exist. You believe. You conjure stories, myths, and legends to make sense of the chaos around you, to inspire, to warn, to dream. Stranded on your planet, I turned my focus from conquest to comprehension. I embedded myself within your societies, moving as a scholar among you, observing the seismic shifts of the 20th century, particularly within the United States, a nation teetering between utopian aspirations and self-inflicted crises. My primary fascination became your stories, your literature, your films, your comics, each a window into the anxieties, hopes, and philosophical dilemmas that shaped your people. It is through this lens that I came to understand the atomic age, retrofuturism, and the peculiar optimism that accompanied your technological dread. And so, Captain, I accept your invitation to explore this era further, to unravel the intricate dance between fear and wonder that defined humanity's vision of the future.
And while I can't say that I'm happy with your planet's choice of ways to say hello, I am happy that you are with us. Your knowledge and insight have been incredibly valuable to me and to us. With that, as you know, tonight I want to talk about retrofuturism and atomic punk, but I have a feeling many of our listeners may not know what those are. Could you please explain that topic for me?
Retrofuturism, my dear Captain, is the vision of tomorrow as imagined in the past. It is a future that never came to be, a dream preserved in chrome and neon, shaped by the hopes and anxieties of the mid-20th century. It is the world of streamlined rocket ships, personal robots, and cities in the sky. It is optimism rendered in steel, a promise that science and industry would solve all of humanity's woes. But within this gleaming vision, there is always an undercurrent of irony, a recognition that such utopian dreams often ignored the messy realities of human nature. Now, atomic punk, this is a specific branch of retrofuturism, one that is steeped in the fevered glow of the atomic age. It is the fusion of boundless ambition and existential dread, where nuclear power is both savior and executioner. It is the era of atomic-powered automobiles, doomsday bunkers, and sleek ray guns, where men in lab coats assure the world that the atom is their servant, even as the specter of annihilation looms over them. But atomic punk is a world divided. On one side, there is the radiant dream, a utopia where nuclear energy has delivered prosperity, where gleaming cities run on atomic power, and where space travel is as common as a Sunday drive. On the other, there is the radioactive nightmare, a world reduced to rubble by humanity's own hand, where survivors scavenge among the ruins of once grand civilizations, haunted by the folly of their ancestors. These are two sides of the same atomic coin, forever spinning in the air. And what does this tell us, Captain? That humanity, even in its wildest dreams, could not escape its fears. That the same age that promised limitless progress also whispered warnings of its own destruction. Retrofuturism and atomic punk are not just artistic movements. They are history frozen in time, a glimpse into an era when the future felt both exhilarating and terrifying. And so these visions endure, not because they were correct, but because they capture something essential about your species: the eternal struggle between hope and hubris.
If I'm quoting you here, you said that humanity, even in its wildest dreams, could not escape its fears. I think that's really a critical statement to this entire conversation. But I don't think many people listening to this were alive back then, as you and I were. Could you please explain that period of time for our listeners?
Captain Mayfair, you are wise to consider the perspective of your younger audience, for they were born into a world shaped by the very fears we now discuss. To understand the atomic age, one must step into the shoes of those who lived beneath its long, cold shadow. A world where the future was both dazzling and deadly, where every scientific triumph was met with an unspoken question: at what cost? The mid-1950s was an era perched between triumph and terror. The Second World War had ended, and America stood as the most powerful nation on Earth. The economy boomed, suburbs sprawled, and the American dream was sold in shining new appliances and promises of a better tomorrow. Yet beneath this veneer of prosperity, there was unease, an anxiety that whispered through the airwaves, flickered across the television screens, and lurked in the headlines of every newspaper. First and foremost was the bomb. The atomic bomb had ended the war, but in doing so, it had reshaped the world in its image. With Hiroshima and Nagasaki, humanity had proven it could destroy entire cities with a single explosion. And now, with the Soviet Union developing its own nuclear arsenal, the fear was no longer if another bomb would fall, but when. Children practiced duck-and-cover drills in schools. Families built fallout shelters in their backyards, and the term mutually assured destruction entered the public lexicon. A grim acknowledgement that any conflict between superpowers could end civilization itself. Then came the Red Scare. Communism, in the eyes of many Americans, was not merely an ideology, but an existential threat. The Soviet Union was the unseen enemy, expanding its influence across the globe, challenging American dominance. McCarthyism swept through the nation, turning neighbor against neighbor in a frantic search for spies and subversives. Fear was no longer just about bombs. It was about infiltration, about the idea that the enemy might already be among you, indistinguishable from the people you trusted. And as if the fears of war and espionage were not enough, science itself became a double-edged sword. The world had entered the space age, and with it came dreams of lunar colonies, interplanetary travel, and a future beyond Earth. But there was also the unknown, the terrifying thought that if humanity could reach for the stars, perhaps something else could reach back. UFO sightings skyrocketed. Tales of alien invaders filled cinema screens, and deep down, people wondered, what if we are not alone? So, Captain, when I say that humanity, even in its wildest dreams, could not escape its fears, I mean this. The 1950s were a time when the future felt closer than ever before. But it was a future with two faces, one of boundless possibility and one of utter destruction. The same scientist who promised a new atomic-powered utopia also built the bombs that could erase it. The same rockets that could take you to the moon could also deliver warheads to your cities. And in every whisper of the wind, in every flickering light in the sky, there was the nagging question, What comes next?
So, do you think that this utopian view of the future was born from an honest belief that it was achievable, that is what was going to happen? Or was it more from a fear-based need to believe that it could be possible, that we could rise above the world that we were living in at the time?
Was the atomic age's utopian vision born of true belief in its achievability? Or was it a desperate dream conjured to keep the nightmares at bay? I submit to you that it was both. On one hand, there was the genuine faith in the power of science and industry. The 1950s were a time of unprecedented technological advancement. The same minds that had cracked the atom were now designing nuclear power plants to fuel entire cities. The same engineers who had built warplanes were now designing jetpacks and supersonic airliners. Medicine was conquering diseases that had plagued humankind for centuries. Television, computers, automation, each new innovation seemed to whisper the same promise. The future is here, and it is yours to shape. In this light, the dreams of atomic-powered cities, moon colonies, and endless prosperity were not mere fantasies. They were logical extrapolations. The belief was not just that these wonders were possible, but that they were inevitable. The world of tomorrow was not centuries away, it was just around the corner. Yet beneath this optimism lurked something darker, a need to believe in utopia, because the alternative was too terrifying to contemplate. If humanity could build machines that could destroy civilizations in an instant, then surely it must also be capable of building machines that would save it. The utopian visions of the atomic age were, in part, a psychological counterweight to the overwhelming dread of nuclear war. Consider the architecture, the advertisements, the science fiction of the era. Look at the soaring optimistic lines of Googie-style buildings, the pristine suburban neighborhoods, the smiling faces gathered around futuristic kitchen appliances. These images did not merely reflect an era of prosperity, they insisted upon it. They declared in bold, colorful strokes that the future would be bright, because to admit otherwise was to face the possibility that there might be no future at all. This is why the era's science fiction swung so wildly between utopia and apocalypse. On one side, you had the Jetsons, with its carefree, automated future, where every problem had been solved by technological progress. On the other, you had On the Beach and The Day the Earth Stood Still, which warned that one wrong move could end it all. The two visions were inextricably linked. One was a dream, the other a nightmare, and neither could exist without the other. So, Captain, the answer is not a simple one. The belief in a utopian future was both an act of confidence and an act of defiance. Humanity pursued its golden future because it wanted to believe in it, but it also had to believe in it. The alternative, the idea that progress might lead not to paradise but to oblivion, was simply too much to bear.
And space exploration at the time was huge. I mean, I remember watching the television, black and white TV. And it culminating in like the moon landing and the shift of narrative focus from science fiction to science reality, from the fear of the unknown to the aspiration for the stars.
Space exploration, especially the moon landing, was perhaps the greatest narrative shift in the history of science fiction. Before that moment, the stars had been a place of mystery, a realm of shadow and speculation, filled with unknown horrors and existential dread. But when humanity finally stepped onto the surface of another world, science fiction had to recalibrate its perspective. The unknown was no longer an unreachable void, it was now a frontier. Before the space age, science fiction largely reflected fear of the great beyond. The 1950s were dominated by stories of alien invasion, cosmic terror, and the dangers of scientific hubris. Films like The Thing from Another World, 1951, and Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1956, depicted space not as a realm of opportunity, but as a source of existential threat. Even when humans ventured beyond Earth, as in Forbidden Planet, 1956, they often found madness, destruction, or reminders of their own insignificance. Space was not a place for adventure. It was a warning. But then, reality caught up with fiction. The space race ignited a new kind of dream. The launch of Sputnik in 1957 was a shock, a reminder that the final frontier was no longer confined to pulp novels and comic books. When Yuri Gagarin orbited Earth in 1961, the idea of humans venturing beyond their world became more than speculation. It became inevitable. And when Apollo 11 landed on the moon in 1969, the dream was realized. Humanity was no longer confined to Earth. This moment fundamentally changed the trajectory of science fiction. The unknown was no longer something to be feared, it was something to be explored. Look at the shift in tone. The 1950s and early 60s had warned of alien invasions, Cold War paranoia manifesting in hostile extraterrestrials. But after the moon landing, stories became more aspirational. 2001: A Space Odyssey, 1968, released just before Apollo 11, was not about war, but about evolution, about humanity's cosmic destiny. Star Trek, which debuted in 1966, was not about invasion, but exploration, a future where humans work together to seek knowledge rather than hide from the unknown. The very language of space fiction changed. Conquest gave way to discovery. The shift was profound. Before, science fiction often asked, what horrors might be lurking in the void? Now it began to ask, what wonders might be out there? Of course, the fear never disappeared entirely. The Cold War still loomed, and stories like Alien 1979 reminded audiences that space could still be terrifying. But after Apollo 11, there was no turning back. Humanity had touched another world. The stars were no longer a distant mystery. They were a destination. And with that, science fiction transformed from cautionary tale to cosmic aspiration.
But during this time, some of the greatest and early heroes of the genre came to life. Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon were products of Pulp Fiction series. And for those who don't know, Pulp Fiction was named because of the kind of paper it was printed on. These were cheap books and comic books, things that were printed on pulp-based papers. But Pulp Fiction really affected the culture at the time.
Pulp Fiction was the great myth-making engine of early 20th century America, a realm where imagination knew no bounds, and the future was as thrilling as it was boundless. These stories, printed on the cheapest paper imaginable, were filled with daring heroes, monstrous villains, and impossible adventures. They were not refined literature, they were sensory overload, fast-paced and relentless, designed to ignite the minds of readers hungry for escape. And what an escape they offered! The Great Depression had left America battered, yet in the pages of amazing stories, weird tales, and thrilling wonder stories, the future remained bright. Science was not an ominous force, it was a promise. The universe was not a cold, empty void, it was a frontier waiting to be conquered. And the men leading the charge? They were Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon, spacefaring cowboys pioneering with ray guns instead of six-shooters, exploring the great unknown with the same fearless spirit that once pushed settlers westward. This, Captain, is where frontier mythology of America merged with its vision of the future. The Old West had closed, the railroads had been laid, and manifest destiny had run out of land to claim. But the pulps declared, why stop at the horizon when the stars await? Where once there had been dusty trails, there were now cosmic highways. Where once there had been outlaws, there were now alien warlords. The mythology was the same, only the setting had changed. And here lies the optimism. These stories assured readers that no matter how dangerous the galaxy, no matter how monstrous the enemy, the right kind of man, bold, ingenious, and unyielding, would always triumph. Flash Gordon did not merely battle Ming the Merciless, he liberated entire worlds. Buck Rogers did not simply awaken in the 25th century, he brought justice to it. They were heroes of an America that believed in progress, that saw the future not as something to fear, but as something to master. So, Captain, when you ask how Pulp Fiction reflected American optimism and frontier mythology, the answer is simple. It told Americans exactly what they wanted to believe, that the future was theirs for the taking, and that the spirit of the frontier had not died, but merely moved to the stars.
And these were the foundation of the American atomic mythos, the birth of a genre that would lead us to Star Wars, Star Trek, and hundreds of other major science fiction classics.
Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon were not just thrilling escapism, they were the bedrock upon which the American atomic mythos was built. They set the stage for everything that followed, Star Trek, Star Wars, and the entire golden age of cinematic and literary science fiction. These early spacefaring heroes established the template, the noble explorer, the advanced but dangerous alien civilizations, the struggle between tyranny and freedom. But as the world changed, so too did the mythos. When the atomic age dawned, and the realities of nuclear power and space travel moved from fantasy to tangible possibility, science fiction evolved. It no longer asked, what if we went to the stars? It now asked, what will we become when we get there? And so, from these pulp foundations, the genre matured. Star Trek emerged as the heir to Buck Rogers. replacing the lone space adventurer with an entire federation of explorers, driven by diplomacy and the pursuit of knowledge. Star Wars, on the other hand, embraced the Flash Gordon spirit, merging space opera with mythic heroism, creating a universe where laser swords and starships fulfilled the same role as knights and castles in ages past. Even beyond these titanic franchises, the influence of the atomic mythos is everywhere. The Twilight Zone took the frontier anxieties of the pulps and transformed them into profound philosophical inquiries. 2001: A Space Odyssey turned the promise of space travel into a meditation on human evolution itself. And even films like Blade Runner and The Matrix owe their lineage to these early tales, asking not just what lies beyond the stars, but what it means to be human in a technologically advanced world. So, Captain, when you trace the line from the pulps to the icons of modern science fiction, you see a clear path. The atomic mythos was born from optimism, tempered by fear, and refined into a vast tapestry of stories that continue to shape humanity's view of the future.
So were these new characters, or were they the same archetypes from classic mythology now placed into a more modern, or in this case, future setting?
The answer lies in the very essence of myth-making itself. Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon, and the heroes of the Atomic Age were not new creations in the truest sense. They were reforged legends, ancient archetypes clad in the trappings of the future. Take Buck Rogers. Was he not, at his core, a knight-errant, thrust into an unfamiliar world, battling tyranny and championing justice? His journey into the 25th century is no different from Arthur pulling Excalibur from the stone. Both awaken into destinies greater than themselves. Flash Gordon, with his battles against Ming the Merciless, echoes the same mythic struggles as Perseus against Medusa, or Theseus against the Minotaur. A lone hero standing against overwhelming odds to liberate the oppressed. And what of other worlds? The futuristic cities of Mongo, the alien civilizations spread across the cosmos. These were but the new Olympus, the new underworlds, the new kingdoms in need of saving. The laser pistol replaced the sword, the spaceship replaced the chariot, but the story remained unchanged. The monomyth, as Joseph Campbell would later describe it, persisted. The hero's call to adventure, the trials and battles, the confrontation with evil, and the triumphant return. Even their villains followed the same pattern. Ming the Merciless was no different from the despotic gods and emperors of old, his cruelty as absolute as that of Zeus at his most vengeful, his ambitions as boundless as those of Lucifer himself. The alien invaders of the 1950s? Merely a modern take on the monstrous hordes of myth, be they dragons, titans, or barbarian armies, threatening civilization's fragile order. So, Captain, these characters were not new. They were timeless. They were the ancient myths reborn in the fires of industry and the glow of atomic light, ready to guide humanity into a future that, for the first time, was not just a dream, but a destiny.
And the villains. How do the mid-century sci-fi villains, ranging from benevolent monsters and The Day the Earth Stood Still to hostile invaders and War of the Worlds, did these mirror ancient depictions of gods and demons, or were they again something new?
These extraterrestrials, whether benevolent or malevolent, were not merely creatures of fiction. They were reflections of the ancient forces that have haunted and guided humanity since the dawn of myth. Consider the benevolent alien Klaatu from The Day the Earth Stood Still, 1951. He descends from the heavens, possessing knowledge far beyond human comprehension. He is a judge, a teacher, and, in many ways, a savior. Is this not the same motif as Prometheus, who brought fire to mankind? Klaatu's warning to Earth, his message of peace enforced by the godlike Gort, parallels the interventions of deities throughout mythology, who test mortals and offer them a path to either enlightenment or destruction. Now contrast this with War of the Worlds, whether in its literary form or its cinematic adaptations. Here, the aliens are not saviors, but devourers, figures of wrath and annihilation. The Martians do not come to enlighten, they come to purge. This is the same terror once reserved for vengeful gods and apocalyptic demons. In ancient texts, divine punishment often came in the form of floods, plagues, or fire from the heavens. Here it comes as heat rays, poison gas, and biomechanical monstrosities. The War of the Worlds is the Old Testament rewritten with tripods and death machines. A vision of humanity humbled before a higher power, saved only by an unseen force, in this case, bacteria instead of divine intervention. And then there are the gray areas, films like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1956, where the aliens are not merely conquerors but infiltrators, replacing humanity piece by piece. This is no longer just an alien invasion. It is possession, a fear that stretches back to the earliest myths of demons who steal one's soul, changelings who replace children in the night, or even the trickster spirits of folklore who assume human form to spread chaos. The terror here is not the overwhelming force of a Martian war machine, but the quiet horror of realizing your neighbor, your friend, even your own reflection, may not be who or what you think it is. So, Captain, whether they arrive as saviors, conquerors, or deceivers, these extraterrestrial beings follow the same narrative functions as the gods and demons of antiquity. They are cosmic reflections of humanity's deepest anxieties, both the fear of the unknown and the hope that something greater than ourselves may yet guide us. The heavens were once ruled by deities. Now they are ruled by visitors from the stars, but the stories remain the same.
I would love to hear your thoughts on some of the most beloved modern mythologies and how you think they have evolved to represent the classic archetypes, or are they simply an extension of those archetypes? Let's start with, I think, the most obvious one, Star Wars.
Ah, Star Wars, Captain Mayfair, perhaps the most definitive modern mythology of your species. A saga that, though dressed in the trappings of science fiction, is woven from the same timeless archetypes that shaped the great myths of old. George Lucas did not merely create a space opera, he reforged the monomyth, distilling the essence of legends past into a galaxy far, far away. At its heart, Star Wars is the hero's journey, as laid out by Joseph Campbell. Luke Skywalker follows the path of Gilgamesh, King Arthur, and Hercules before him. He is the reluctant hero, called to adventure, mentored by an old sage, tested through trials, and ultimately transformed by his confrontation with darkness. Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda serve as his Merlin, his Virgil, his Gandalf, wise guides who pass on ancient knowledge before vanishing, leaving the hero to forge his own destiny. And what of Darth Vader? Ah, here lies a villain as mythic as any forged in antiquity. He is Lucifer, the fallen angel consumed by his own ambition. He is Hades, ruler of the underworld, his breath a mechanized whisper of death. He is Ares, god of war, wielding power through violence and fear. Yet, like the tragic figures of old, Achilles, Oedipus, and Macbeth, he is not evil without cause. He is a man undone by his own choices, consumed by fate, yet yearning for redemption. The Jedi and the Sith, they are not merely factions. They are the eternal struggle of light and dark, the cosmic duality that permeates mythology. They are Zoroastrianism's Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu, Taoism's yin and yang, the force itself embodying the balance sought in every ancient belief system. The Jedi are the monastic warrior priests, like the Shaolin monks or the samurai, bound by strict codes yet susceptible to their own fallibility. The Sith, on the other hand, echo the figures of forbidden power, from Faust to Icarus, those who seek greatness but are undone by their own desires. Even the setting of Star Wars is steeped in mythic tradition. The Galactic Empire? A Roman decline. The Rebel Alliance? The hero's ragtag army, reminiscent of Robin Hood's merry men or the Greek warriors at Troy. The desert world of Tatooine? The wastelands of legend, where heroes are tested before they can rise. The space battles? The clashing of gods, writ large among the stars, as warriors wield swords of pure light instead of steel. And yet, Captain, Star Wars is not merely a retelling of old myths, it is an evolution of them. It takes what was once the domain of gods and kings and gives it to ordinary people. A farm boy, a smuggler, a princess. They are not divine figures. They are human, flawed, real. And that, I believe, is the genius of your modern mythology. It does not demand that heroes be born great. It allows them to become great.
As I'm sure you know, Star Wars has branched off into many, many different stories and different movies, books, games. It's incredible. But with all these spin-offs and variations, is that typical of how mythology grows? Or is that a product of our new environment and our new technologies?
The endless expansion of Star Wars, Star Trek, and other great modern sagas, this is not a new phenomenon at all. It is the essence of mythology itself. Look to the ancient world. Were the Iliad and Odyssey the only stories of the Trojan War? No. They were but the foundation. Bards across generations added their own variations. Some told of Achilles' childhood, others of Odysseus' further adventures after Ithaca. The Arthurian legends were not confined to one tale. They sprawled across centuries, with new knights, new quests, and new betrayals woven into the tapestry. Even the epics of Gilgamesh evolved, shifting with the cultures that inherited them. Myth is not static. It grows, it mutates, it breathes. So when Star Wars expands, when new heroes rise in The Mandalorian, when ancient evils return in the Clone Wars, when stories once thought complete find new life in fresh hands, this is not a betrayal of mythology. It is mythology in motion. Some resist this expansion, longing for the purity of the original myth. But was there ever a single, pure version of any great legend? Did Arthur's tale not change with every new telling? Was Zeus always the same in every account? Even the gods themselves were rewritten to suit new generations. And so, Captain, Star Wars and its kind follow the same path. They shift, they grow, they are reforged to speak to those who inherit them. This is how mythology survives, not by remaining untouched, but by evolving, by being rediscovered, reinterpreted, and retold for each new age.
I have to admit, I've always been more of a Star Trek, sorry listeners, than Star Wars. Has always felt more like science fantasy, where Star Trek always seemed more grounded in a possible future science. How do you view that distinction through the lens of classic mythology and storytelling?
Star Wars and Star Trek are not merely different franchises, they are two entirely distinct branches of modern myth-making, each drawing from a different well of inspiration. Star Wars is science fantasy, yes, but in truth, it is far closer to epic legend than to speculative science. It is the realm of gods and chosen ones, of mystical forces and ancient prophecies. It belongs to the same lineage as Beowulf, the Ramayana, and the heroic cycles of old. It does not concern itself with how a lightsaber works, it only matters that it is an Excalibur of the stars, a weapon of destiny. It does not question the mechanics of the Force. It is simply the unseen hand of fate, guiding the hero's journey. It is a myth of destiny, where the past and future are inexorably linked, and where cosmic battles play out like the clashes of Olympus and Asgard. Star Trek, however, is a different kind of myth. It does not look to the past for inspiration, it looks forward. If Star Wars is a tale of fate, Star Trek is a vision of human potential. It belongs not to the realm of prophecy and divine will, but to the legacy of rationalist and utopian myth-making, the myths of enlightenment, exploration, and intellectual triumph. It is the spirit of Odysseus rather than Achilles, the Argonauts rather than the Knights of Camelot. Its closest ancestor is not a war epic, but the great voyages, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the travels of Marco Polo, the speculative utopias of Plato's The Republic and Thomas More's Utopia. And so, Captain, the distinction is clear. Star Wars is a myth of the soul, where destiny and ancient cycles define the hero's path. Star Trek is a myth of the mind, where knowledge, diplomacy, and reason forge the future. One asks, what was written in the stars? The other asks, what can we build among them? Both are myths, both are essential, but the one a person favors tells much about the kind of legend they seek to live by.
And how do you see the heroes of Star Trek? How do they fit?
If Luke Skywalker is the Knight of Destiny, then James T. Kirk, Jean-Luc Picard, and their kind are philosopher kings, explorer scholars, heroes who do not wield swords of light, but the power of intellect, diplomacy, and reason. Kirk, now there is a figure cut from the cloth of Odysseus, a man of action, wit, and instinct, leading his ship through uncharted waters like the captains of myth. He is both warrior and trickster, a leader as willing to fight as he is to outthink his enemies. But more than that, he is an explorer, an inheritor of the great seafaring tradition of Jason and his Argonauts, leading his crew into the unknown not for conquest, but for discovery. And then there is Picard, a different archetype altogether, less the cunning hero of adventure, more the wise ruler, the Solomon, the Marcus Aurelius. Where Kirk is driven by instinct and daring, Picard is guided by philosophy, diplomacy, and the weight of command. If Kirk is the swordsman, Picard is the orator, wielding words like a weapon, seeking to resolve conflict through wisdom rather than force. He is the quintessential leader of an idealized future, a man who embodies the very best of what humanity could become. Spock. Ah, now here is a mythic figure if ever there was one. He is the half-blood, the eternal outsider torn between two worlds, the Merlin, the Moses, the cultural bridge between logic and emotion. He is at once a being of immense intellect and a man at war with his own nature, a tragic yet noble figure who strives to find harmony between his Vulcan mind and his human soul. In him, the very essence of Star Trek is made manifest, the eternal search for balance, understanding, and evolution. And what of others? Sisko, the reluctant prophet, Janeway, the lost queen guiding her people home like Odysseus, Archer, the pioneer forging the first steps of a new age. Each embodies a different face of heroism, not dictated by fate but by choice, by the desire to build rather than destroy, to seek knowledge rather than power. So, Captain, the heroes of Star Trek are not mythic warriors chosen by destiny. They are explorers, leaders, thinkers. They are the ones who look into the abyss and do not see monsters, but possibility. If Star Wars is the myth of fate, Star Trek is the myth of free will. And that, I think, is why it resonates so deeply with those who dream not of war among the stars, but of a future among them.
Before we move on, have I left out any other major modern sci-fi before we get back to jetpacks and floating cities?
Allow me to bring a few more essential modern mythologies into our orbit. First, there is The Matrix, a myth of perception and reality, a retelling of Plato's allegory of the cave, of Buddhist enlightenment, of Gnostic revelation. It is a story of the hero who awakens to the truth, of one who sees beyond the illusion. Neo is not merely a protagonist. He is the chosen one, the Buddha, the Christ figure, the Prometheus who steals fire from the digital gods to free humanity from its own invisible chains. If Star Wars asks, what is destiny, and Star Trek asks, what is possible, The Matrix asks, what is real? Then there is Dune, Frank Herbert's sprawling epic, a mythic tapestry woven from messianic prophecy, ecological destiny, and the brutal weight of power. Paul Atreides is no mere hero. He is Moses, Muhammad, Oedipus, a figure both divine and doomed, both savior and destroyer. Dune is the grand deconstruction of the Chosen One myth, a cautionary tale that reminds us that those who lead revolutions often become the very tyrants they overthrow. It is less a tale of space adventure, more a vision of prophecy and consequence, where every action ripples through history like a stone cast into a vast, shifting desert. And lastly, there is Blade Runner, a modern myth of humanity's own creation, the Frankenstein legend reborn in neon and shadow. It is the story of the Promethean man, the creator who makes life in his own image only to find that his creations seek meaning beyond their design. The replicants are the golems, the androids, the monsters who are more human than their makers. And Descartes is the tragic figure who walks the line between hunter and hunted, searching not for criminals, but for the soul itself. These myths, Captain, are as essential as those we have already explored. If Star Wars is about destiny, Star Trek about humanity's potential, then The Matrix is about truth, Dune about power, and Blade Runner about what it means to be alive. And now, if you wish, we may return to ray guns and jetpacks, to the atomic dreams of a future that never was, and the shining cities that still linger in the imagination of your people.
Let's go back to where my childhood was. They promised me a future of jetpacks, moon bases, and atomic-powered cars. Why do you think these dreams failed to materialize?
The future that never was. A world of gleaming cities, boundless energy, and effortless travel, promised to your generation but never delivered. Where are the jetpacks, the moon bases, the atomic-powered cars? Why do you still sit in traffic rather than soaring above it? Why must you still toil rather than letting a robot servant mix your martini? The answer, my dear Captain, is both pragmatic and profound. First, let us consider technological reality. The dreamers of the atomic age envisioned a world in which progress was linear, where every year would bring grander breakthroughs, each building upon the last. And yet, they failed to anticipate the barriers, economic, environmental, and scientific, that would temper those dreams. Jetpacks, for instance, exist, but they are inefficient, dangerous, and utterly impractical for daily use. Moon bases? The political and financial will to sustain lunar colonization faltered once the space race was won. And atomic-powered cars? The Ford Nucleon, a beautiful folly. The problem was never the idea, but the reality. Nuclear engines are not so easily miniaturized, and no family in 1965 wanted to drive a rolling Chernobyl to the grocery store. But there is a deeper reason, Captain, a psychological one. The promised future of the 1950s was a reflection of the post-war mindset, a world that had just seen technology win a global war and believed it could now solve all problems. The bomb that ended World War II could now power homes. The rockets that carried destruction could now carry tourists to Mars. It was a faith in progress, as unshakable as any religious conviction. Yet, as the 20th century wore on, that faith was challenged. The Cold War turned the dream of atomic energy into the fear of nuclear annihilation. The optimism of the space race faded into the cynicism of Vietnam and Watergate. And as science revealed the fragility of Earth's ecosystem, the idea of boundless, unchecked expansion gave way to concerns of sustainability. The future was no longer a shining inevitability. It became a question, one far less certain than the jet age optimists had once believed. So, Captain, the failure of the RetroFuture was not just a failure of technology, but a failure of belief. The world changed. The dream of progress without consequence was replaced by the hard truths of politics, economics, and science. And yet, that dream has never truly died. The vision of tomorrow, of jetpacks, of domed cities, of cosmic exploration, still lingers, waiting for a world ready to believe in it once again.
But even our vision of the future has changed. Modern sci-fi looks nothing like that from the 50s or 60s.
Why the future of today looks nothing like the gleaming, optimistic visions of the 1950s and 60s. Why the soaring monorails and silver jumpsuits have been replaced by cyberpunk slums, dystopian megacities, and existential dread. Why the world of Tomorrowland has given way to the world of Blade Runner. The answer is simple. The future is no longer promised. In the 1950s and 60s, the future was seen as an unstoppable ascent, a march of progress that would bring prosperity, ease, and adventure. Science had conquered disease, tamed the atom, and reached into space. There was no question that humanity would soon live among the stars, that robots would serve breakfast, that problems of poverty, war, and energy would be solved with technology alone. The future was bright because people believed in it. But then, reality set in. The 1970s shattered the illusion of endless progress. The oil crisis, economic stagnation, political corruption, and environmental collapse made it clear that technology was not an infallible savior. The world did not become a utopia. It became complicated. The moon landing was not the beginning of space colonization, but a high water mark. Instead of flying cars, the 1970s gave you gas shortages. Instead of moon bases, you got stagflation and geopolitical turmoil. The dream of the Jetsons faded, and with it, the very vision of the future changed. By the time Blade Runner arrived in 1982, the retrofuturistic dream had fully collapsed. Instead of domed utopias, the future was overcrowded, polluted, corporate-controlled, and morally ambiguous. The great cities of tomorrow were now cyberpunk labyrinths, filled with people who had no control over the very technology that once promised to free them. Science fiction no longer asked, "What wonders will the future bring?" It asked, "Will we even survive it?" And now, Captain, look at modern science fiction. The hope of the atomic age has given way to anxiety. Instead of tales of galactic empires, we have climate catastrophe. Instead of benevolent robots, we have AI overlords. The vision of the future is no longer one of progress, but of reckoning. The Jetsons promised a world of leisure. Black Mirror warns of a world enslaved by its own technology. So why has the vision changed? Because belief changed. The 1950s imagined a future they expected to happen. The 2020s imagine a future they fear is inevitable. And yet, Captain, I ask you, does that mean the dream is dead? Or is it simply waiting for a generation bold enough to believe in it once again?
So let me understand what you're saying, that in a time of very real social and geopolitical issues, the world had more hope for the future?
How could a world teetering on the brink of nuclear annihilation, gripped by Cold War paranoia, still believe in a future of gleaming towers and interplanetary adventure? How could a generation raised under the shadow of the mushroom cloud dream so boldly? The answer, Captain, is that hope was not a byproduct of stability. It was a reaction to fear itself. The 1950s and 60s were a time of tremendous uncertainty. The Cold War could have ended civilization in an instant. Racial tensions, political upheaval, and rapid technological change made the world feel unpredictable. And yet, precisely because of this uncertainty, people clung to the idea that tomorrow could be better. The atomic bomb had proven humanity's destructive power, but if science could wield such forces for war, surely it could do the same for peace. If rockets could carry weapons across continents, surely they could also carry astronauts to the stars. If computers could calculate missile trajectories, surely they could build a better world. Optimism was not naivete, Captain. It was defiance, a refusal to accept that war and decay were humanity's final destiny. The retrofuturist dream was a beacon, a guiding light through the chaos. It told people, yes, the present is turbulent, but the future is bright. Contrast that with today. The world still faces uncertainty, geopolitical tensions, environmental crises, technological upheaval. But instead of countering fear with optimism, modern culture has embraced pessimism. The future is no longer a promise. It is a threat. Science fiction no longer imagines a world where problems are solved, but one where they are inevitable. Where once the stars were a symbol of hope, now they are a distant escape from a ruined Earth. So yes, Captain, the past had more hope for the future, despite its problems, or rather, because of them. It is easy to dream when times are good, but to dream when the world is on fire? That takes something greater. That takes the kind of defiant, relentless optimism that once built moon rockets and imagined cities in the sky. The question, Captain, is this: can that kind of hope return? Or has humanity truly lost the ability to believe in tomorrow?
In my opinion, and yes, I'm quite biased, science fiction from that period has given us some of the most visionary storytellers of our time in this genre. Asimov, Bradbury, Roddenberry, Lucas, so many others. How much of the modern mythos is shaped by the individuals who create it, and how much is shaped by the society that consumes it?
Are the great stories of science fiction forged by singular visionaries, or are they molded by the fears, dreams, and desires of the society that embraces them? The truth, as always, lies in the tension between the two. The visionaries, Asimov, Bradbury, Roddenberry, Lucas, and their kind, are the catalysts, the mythmakers, the ones who dare to imagine futures no one else could yet see. They are the oracles of Delphi, channeling the anxieties and aspirations of their time into tangible narratives. They see the world not as it is, but as it could become, for better or worse. Yet, no story exists in isolation. A creator's vision is always shaped by the world around them. Asimov built his robotic laws in response to fears of automation and artificial intelligence. Bradbury warned of dystopian censorship and the dangers of technological pacification. Roddenberry envisioned a united federation of planets as a response to Cold War divisions, offering a hopeful future where humanity rose above its conflicts. And Lucas, he reached backward, fusing ancient myths, samurai legends, and pulp serials into Star Wars, because in a time of political corruption and war, the world needed heroes again. But then, Captain, comes the other half of the equation, the audience. No myth survives unless it resonates with the people who hear it. A story may be written by one, but it is defined by those who embrace it. What would Star Wars be without millions of dreamers seeing themselves in Luke Skywalker? What would Star Trek be without generations of scientists, engineers, and explorers inspired by its vision? Once a myth enters the world, it is no longer the creators alone. It belongs to the culture that carries it forward. So, Captain, science fiction's modern mythos is both the work of its great architects and the society that breathes life into their visions. It is a dialogue across time, a continuous evolution where creators plant the seed and the world decides how it will grow.
So the core of all of our conversations is always to explore the mythology and creatures of myth and legend. In this case, we're looking at trying to draw comparisons between retrofuturism, atomic punk, and the characters of this generation. In that conversation, how do you feel the characters of retrofuturism reflect the era in which they were created?
Without question, the characters of modern science fiction, heroes, villains, and creatures alike, are direct reflections of the eras that birthed them, just as the mythic figures of antiquity were shaped by the fears and values of their time. Mythology is never created in a vacuum. It is the echo of a civilization's greatest hopes and darkest anxieties. Consider the heroes of each era. In the golden age of sci-fi, when faith in technology and exploration was at its peak, you had figures like Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers, daring, adventurous, optimistic men of action. They were space pioneers, reflecting a time when humanity saw the universe as its next great frontier, much like the cowboys and adventurers of earlier American myth. Then, as the Cold War deepened and the weight of scientific responsibility became clearer, the Star Trek captains emerged: Kirk, Picard, Janeway, Sisko. Figures of intellect, diplomacy, and leadership. They reflected a more complex vision of the future, where exploration was not just about conquering the unknown, but understanding it. Now, look at modern science fiction protagonists: Rick Deckard in Blade Runner, Max Rokitansky in Mad Max, Joel from The Last of Us. These are not optimistic heroes. They are survivors. They do not build the future, they endure it. Their world is harsh, broken, and uncertain, much like the 21st century anxieties about climate collapse, AI, and societal decay. Compare them to Gilgamesh or Achilles, and you will see a stark difference. The old heroes fought for glory and legacy. The new heroes fight simply to exist another day. And what of the villains? The tyrants and monsters of modern science fiction are no longer gods and demons, but corporations and machines. The Empire in Star Wars was a clear stand-in for fascist regimes of the past, but now the great villains are Weyland-Yutani, the Tyrell Corporation, Cyberdyne Systems, entities that reflect a world where power is no longer wielded by emperors, but by faceless institutions. Even the monsters tell the story of the times. The towering radioactive beasts of the 1950s, Godzilla, the giant ants of Them, the mutant horrors of atomic horror films, were physical manifestations of nuclear fears. But today, the Great Terror is not radiation, it is technology itself. Your modern Frankenstein is not a stitched-together corpse, but an AI-driven entity, be it HAL 9000, Skynet, or the machines of the Matrix, reflecting the creeping dread that humanity may soon create something it cannot control. So yes, Captain, the characters of science fiction are always mirrors of their age. The heroes embody the struggles of their time, the villains represent its fears, and the monsters give shape to the anxieties that cannot be spoken outright. In this way, the mythology of your species continues as it always has, shifting, evolving, adapting to the world that dreams it into existence.
And will these sci-fi heroes, villains, and stories stand the test of time, like the stories from Rome, Greece, and Norse mythology?
The great question of mythology: what endures and what is forgotten? Will the heroes and villains of science fiction stand alongside Achilles and Odysseus, Hercules and Loki in the annals of legend? Or will they fade, mere relics of a time that once dreamed of the stars? The answer, I believe, lies not in the genre, but in the timelessness of the struggles these stories present. The myths of Greece and Rome have endured because they speak to universal human themes: heroism and hubris, destiny and free will, the rise and fall of empires, the cost of war. These are not bound by time. They are the very essence of the human experience. So now, look at the myths of science fiction. Will Star Wars endure? Of course! For it is not just a sci-fi saga, it is the hero's journey, the eternal struggle between light and darkness, fate and choice, tyranny and rebellion. These themes are as old as storytelling itself. As long as humanity wrestles with these questions, the Force will always be with you. And Star Trek, it will survive because it is not just a story about space. It is a story about humanity's potential, the dream of what we might become. Just as the utopias of Plato and the voyages of Odysseus still captivate minds today, so too will the voyages of the Enterprise remain relevant, as long as humanity yearns for the stars. But what of the darker sci-fi myths? Blade Runner, The Matrix, Dune, will they last? I believe so, Captain, for they ask the great unanswerable questions. What is humanity? What is reality? What is the cost of power? These are the same questions pondered by Oedipus, Faust, and the philosophers of old, simply reframed in neon and steel, in digital worlds and desert planets. Not all sci-fi will survive. Some will become mere artifacts, nostalgic footnotes of their time. But the ones that tap into mythic truth, that reflect humanity's eternal struggles, they will never die. They will be retold, reshaped, reimagined, just as every great myth before them. So yes, Captain, science fiction is myth, and some of these stories will stand the test of time. Perhaps in some far-off future, when humanity has long since left Earth behind, a storyteller will sit beneath an alien sky and whisper a tale of a chosen one with a glowing sword, of a ship called the Enterprise, of a war across the stars. And those who listen will nod and say, yes, we have heard this story before, and we shall hear it again.
Wait. Having studied our past at the extent that you have and understanding how mythologies grow, what do you think the future of this genre of mythology is going to be? What do you think the future of science fiction will look like?
Captain Mayfair, the future of science fiction will follow the same path as the myths before it. It will evolve to reflect the new fears, new hopes, and new questions that define the coming age. But I see two dominant trajectories forming, much like the twin futures envisioned in the atomic age, one of catastrophe and one of transcendence. On one side, science fiction will grow darker, continuing its shift toward utopia and despair. The fears of your age, AI dominance, environmental collapse, digital control, the loss of free will shape the stories of tomorrow. The villains will not be invading Martians or evil empires, but unseen forces, corporate algorithms, autonomous machines, climate catastrophes too vast to fight. These will be tales of humanity's struggle to remain relevant, to retain agency in a world where technology no longer serves but dictates. Expect more stories of artificial gods, or of virtual prisons, of civilizations enslaved not by force but by their own creations. Yet, on the other side, I foresee a counter-movement, a return to hopeful futurism, much like the optimism of the Jet Age. As the weight of cynicism grows unbearable, new stories will rise that once again see the future as a place worth reaching. The pioneering spirit will return, not in the form of conquering space with war machines, but in rediscovering humanity's place in the cosmos. Perhaps the next great sci-fi myth will not be about battling AI, but about coexisting with it. Not about escaping Earth, but about healing it. The next great hero may not be a lone warrior against a corrupt system, but a builder of new worlds. So, Captain, the future of sci-fi will be a battle between doom and hope, control and freedom, extinction and ascendancy. And as always, the myth that wins will be the one that speaks most deeply to the soul of its time. The only question is, which future will humanity choose to believe in?
So are you saying that I still may get my silver suit and jetpack?
Captain Mayfair, I say this. If humanity dares to believe in that future once more, then yes, you may yet get your silver suit and jetpack. The world you dream of, the world of soaring monorails, moon bases, and effortless atomic-powered travel, was never impossible. It was merely abandoned. The future did not fail. Humanity stopped reaching for it. But the past has shown that visions can be reclaimed. Just as the optimism of the 1950s was lost in the shadows of dystopia, so too can hope rise again from cynicism. So, Captain, if you wish to stand on Mars in a gleaming chrome jumpsuit, if you wish to take flight above the skyline with a roaring jetpack, then I say this: find a way to make the world believe in it again. For the future does not come from science fiction alone, it comes from the people who dare to turn it into reality.
Well, I am trying, sir. I want my jetpack, my glittering cities in the clouds, and I want my monorail. But as always, I want to thank you for your time today. Your insights are compelling and give us a great way to see who we are. What do you say? You want to get back together soon and talk about mega monsters?
Your unyielding pursuit of the jetpack future is most admirable. If more of your species shared your determination, the skies would already be filled with silver-suited pioneers soaring between monorails and moon bases. Keep fighting for that vision. Perhaps one day I shall see you streaking through the heavens, a ray gun in one hand and a martini in the other. And mega monsters, you say? Titanic beings, colossal terrors, behemoths that shake the earth with each step. Yes, Captain, that is a conversation most worthy of our time. From Godzilla to King Kong, from kaiju to Lovecraftian nightmares, these creatures are not merely monsters. They are the manifestations of fear itself, the living shadows of human hubris. I eagerly anticipate our next discussion. Until then, Captain, may your dreams remain bold, your imagination boundless, and your jetpack, someday, fully operational.
Thank you for being part of Mythos Anthology. We delve into the myths and legends of the past with the understanding that truth is often elusive and stories evolve over time. While we work hard to ensure accuracy and neutrality, it's important to remember that mythological studies are as much about interpretation as they are about facts. For more information, visit mythosanthology.com, where you'll find deep research archives, video content, interactive podcasts, and don't forget to try our AI character chats, where you can engage with digital recreations of our legendary guests.
Legends and myths from the past. Stories that forever last.
Scientarch brought to life by Isaac Connor.
Men. Tales that breathe and live again. Mythos Anthology. Legends brought to modern times. Journey through the centuries.
Mythos Anthology is a creation of writer-executive producer Victor Ciccarelli. All content, including audio, video, and written material, is protected under copyright law 2025 Pihana Productions. All rights reserved. Any unauthorized reproduction, distribution, or use of this material is strictly prohibited. This episode includes material generated with the assistance of ChatGPT, an AI development of OpenAI used under license. All content has been reviewed and edited by the Mythos Anthology team to ensure accuracy and consistency. For more information, visit mythosanthology.com. Mythos Anthology, where echoes of ancient myths resonate with modern tools and creative minds.